body of Christ, kind of comes in. So like when people will say, okay, I hear what you're saying, Mrs. Thabiti, all that stuff sounds great, but how do we not identify when pursuing social justice? How do we not identify with ourselves as a Black person first and a Christian second? Because that's often the thing that gets said to us when we do speak about, particularly, from a disenfranchised and disadvantaged man or woman's perspective. That's often the thing that I'll hear. They say, okay, well, you're identifying yourself as, a Black person first and a Christian second. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a contradiction in that. I don't think that's something that has to be reconciled. Let me tell you why. In every area of life, when one's threatened, you have to eliminate the threat in order to be safe, right?
Okay.
So, if you're a soldier, you're in the army, you're out on patrol or something, and you see the enemy across the field with guns aimed at you, and there's in the next town there's some tanks that the enemy has. In that moment, you're not trying to deal with the tanks. You got people just across the yard with guns trained on you. You deal with the immediate threat. You deal with the thing that's impinging upon you. And so it is with African-American Christians. We are Christians. That's our primary identity. But it's no mistake that we are African-Americans. God has made us that way for his glory. So we don't have to sort of throw that away as if it's not legitimate in some sense. It's not primary, but it's not illegitimate. And when we're talking about these justice issues, I think people just have to recognize that our oppression in this country has not been because we're Christians. It's been because we're Black, right? And so we have to deal with the threat at hand. And so that's
a good point.
Addressing the racial injustices that we have suffered here. So, when you think about the 1950s, 1960s civil rights movement, Dr. King is not protesting because Christians are being segregated.
Right.
He's not protesting because Christians are being lynched. He's protesting because Black folk are being lynched. That's the threat, right? Now, if we were in some other country, if we were in China, we might have to be, dealing with these things because we're Christians. We're being persecuted as a Christian minority, but that's not the case. And so when someone tries to say, hey, you're being too Black and not Christian enough, I'm simply saying, but that's what you're shooting at, right? And that's what I've got to defend. That's the threat I have to eliminate. And it's usually people who are on the side of the shooters who are saying that. And we just can't be taken in and hoodwinked in that way. We just have to say, listen, no, this is the threat. This is the issue. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with it like Christians, and Christ is primary, but it's not our identity as Christians that's being challenged, that's being threatened or being oppressed in that way. And so we got to keep first things first.
Now, what about those people who might be in that analogy, they might be on the side of the shooters, but they don't see that. Like, they don't see that. Like, in their lens, they just don't see. When I hear you say that, I agree 1,000% with what you're saying, but I'm learning that it's people who are metaphorically speaking, or as Jesus would say, parably speaking, on the side of the shooters in that analogy, but they don't see that. Like, they hear that and they go, I'm not on that side. I'm just living, and I'm 30, 40, 50, 60, however many years old, and I'm just doing this. I'm not on that side.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Let me get you on.
Oh, no, I just wanted to hear your response to that thought.
Yeah, well, I think there are people who say things like that who probably fall into different categories.
Sure.
So there are people who are genuinely just ignorant. They just don't know. Oh, I didn't know that was going on. And who could probably be helped with some conversation, just sort of giving them information they don't have, really addressing what is a kind of benign ignorance, a benign not knowing, right? So that's one category of people, and that's one kind of conversation. But then there are people who say that And actually, they're saying that as a way of self-justifying while they're participating in behaviors that are unjust or problematic. And those folks you have to address those folks with a different kind of response. It's not just information that has to be given. Those folks have to actually come by God's Spirit to be convicted of their wrongdoing, of their hypocrisy, really.
Yeah.
And so there's a great difference between a benign ignorance and willful ignorance or hypocrisy. And those folks just have to be rebuked, honestly. We have to point out their sins and transgressions and call them to repentance and renewal and to reconciliation. And then there have always been Christians in the American church who have not just been sort of ignorant or not just hypocritical, but who just are flat out the shooters. I mean, they are the oppressors. They have quite intentionally argued for what they consider to be their rights over and against the rights of others, argued for what they consider to be their supremacy over other people groups and so on. And they just have to be sort of addressed the way you would address anyone else shooting at you, to use that analogy still. I mean, listen, when you think about Dr. King's letter to a Birmingham jail, that's addressed to Christian pastors and leaders who saw themselves as moderates, who saw themselves as not the conservative, racist, segregationist Christians. They saw themselves as the good guys, just being patient and so on and so forth. And so that sort of posture of I'm not doing this, but I'm also not helping you, has been a posture that's been here from day one. And we have to help people understand it's not enough to just not be racist. One has to be anti-racist as well. So if I can use another analogy, guy goes to the gym, he works out in the gym, goes in the locker room, a bunch of dudes in the locker room having that locker room talk. Maybe they're talking inappropriately about women and things of that sort. Well, that guy goes in the locker room, he takes a shower, puts his clothes on, he doesn't participate in the joking, he leaves the locker room, goes home to his wife. And when asked about it, he says, well, I didn't participate in that. I didn't tell those jokes. I don't laugh at those kind of jokes. And you go, well, that's nice. That's good that you didn't do that. But you also had a responsibility to actually check those cats in the locker room and say, hey, man, that's not funny. You shouldn't be talking that way. You have to be anti-sexist.
Yeah.
Not just say, I'm not a sexist. If we want to, in fact, be people who are for social justice, we can't be bystanders. These are commands in the Bible that we're dealing with. God says, do justice, bring justice to the widow and the fatherless. These are things we have to be actively engaged in.